Yes, there we are. Oh, heavens to Betsy. My, we're so blue today. Hello! Looks like people are logging in. Yes, it's that time. Is it 1:30? It was 1:29 when I last looked. Doom, 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 doom. Yeah, it looks like you're... Well, I'm live, and it seems to be working. Oh, there we all are. Hi! Lighting, yes, bonnet. Now, this particular bonnet is not exactly the same shade of blue, but it's lovely, and it'll work. It's blue enough. I want my other bonnets get here soon. So, yesterday, we were reading about the Ingalls and their issues with malaria, and Mrs. Scott, who was kind of heroic because she showed up, with soup and all and helped people, but Mrs. Scott's kind of a nut because she was saying that watermelon was what gave malaria. I like, no, and I actually have watermelon in the house. Yes, good Sunday indeed. It's marvelous watermelon, and it does not cause malaria. I'm so happy. Tasty. And I do have my tin cup of milk, and I have Girl Scout cookies. Yeah. So today, feeding my face, I have more cornbread left too. Is chapter 17. Pa goes to town, and this is a nice chapter. Nothing too dreadful happens, but it's gonna get real, because they're on the prairie in Kansas, and this is the chapter where Laura talks about the issues with the Native Americans and the treaties and the settlers and the land. This is it. This is the controversial chapter where, guess who? Mrs. Scott says really inflammatory stuff, and it gets crazy. But her Laura's views become quite clear, and they are not Mrs. Scott's. Say, Pa goes to town. This can't be too bad, can it? We hope. Before dawn, Pa went away. When Laura and Mary woke, he was gone, and everything was empty and lonely. It was not as though Pa had only gone hunting. He was going to town, and he would not be back for 4 long days. Wow. Go to the store. It's hard. Bunny had been shut in the stable, so she couldn't follow her mother. The trip was too long for a colt. Bunny whinnied lonesomely. Laura and Mary stayed in the house with Ma. Outdoors was too large and empty to play in when Pa was away. Jack was uneasy too, and watchful. At noon, Laura went with Ma to water Bunny and to move the cow's picket pin to fresh grass. The cow was quite gentle now. She followed where Ma led, and she would even let Ma milk her. Remember, this is the cow that kicked Pa first time tried to milk her. She's pretty wild. At milking time, Ma was putting on her bonnet when suddenly all Jack's hair stood up stiff on his neck and back, and he rushed out of the house. They heard a yell and a scramble and a shout. "Call off your dog! Call off your dog!" Mr. Edwards was on top of the woodpile, and Jack was climbing up after him. "He's got me treed," Mr. Edwards said, backing along the top of the woodpile. Ma could hardly make Jack come away. Jack grinned savagely, and his eyes were red. He had to let Mr. Edwards come down from the woodpile, but he watched him every minute. Ma said, "I declare, he seems to know that Mr. Ingalls isn't here." He does, Jack's guard dog. Mr. Edwards said the dogs knew more than most folks gave him credit for. Heck, this is the dog that knew they had malaria and let the doctor in, even though he didn't know him. So the dog is smart. On his way to town that morning, Pa had stopped at Mr. Edwards' house and asked him to come over every day to see that everything was all right. And Mr. Edwards was such a good neighbor, he had come at chore time to do the chores for Ma. Yeah. But Jack had made up his mind not to let anyone but Ma go near the cow or Bunny while Pa was gone. He had to be shut in the house while Mr. Edwards did the chores. When Mr. Edwards went away, he said to Ma, "Keep that dog in the house tonight, and you'll be safe enough." The dark crept slowly all around the house. The wind cried mournfully, and owls said, "Ooh, ooh, ooh, ooh." A wolf howled, "Arr!" And Jack growled low in his throat, "Arr!" Mary and Laura sat close to Ma in the firelight. They knew they were safe in the house because Jack was there and Ma had pulled the latch string in. And Pa finally built a door and put a lock on it. Next day was empty like the first. Jack paced around the stable and around the house, then around the stable and back to the house. He would not pay any attention to Laura. That afternoon, Mrs. Scott came to visit with Ma. While they visited, Laura and Mary sat politely, as still as mice. Mrs. Scott admired the new rocking chair. The more she rocked in it, the more she enjoyed it, and she said how neat and comfortable and pretty the house was. Now, remember, we liked Mrs. Scott, even though Laura referred to her as the fat woman. Poor lady. The poor fat woman who made, but she brought them soap and took care of them. She was a lovely person, picking on her about her size. It's Mrs. Scott. She's lucky to have any meat on her bones on the prairie. People hardly have food. She said she hoped to goodness they would have no trouble with Indians. Okay, this is where Mrs. Scott, basically she's the Harriet Oleson of this chapter. She goes totally Mrs. Oleson, wackadoo in here. And this is the paragraph. This is where people say, "Ugh! Does Laura Ingalls Wilder bear animosity towards Native Americans?" Well, no, because Laura Ingalls Wilder is a novel, and the character even of Laura is totally pro-Native American, as is Pa. Mrs. Scott, however, expresses the sentiments felt by really a lot of people in the 1870s and even people in the 1930s when this came out. So brace yourselves, because Mrs. Scott's going to go full racist on us. Mr. Scott had heard rumors of trouble. She said, "Land knows they'd never do anything with this country themselves. All they do is roam around over it like wild animals. Treaties or no treaties, the land belongs to the folks that'll farm it. That's only common sense and justice." Oh dear. She did not know why the government made treaties with Indians. The only good Indian was a dead Indian. The very thought of Indians made her blood run cold. She said, "I can't forget the Minnesota massacre. My pa and my brothers went out with the rest of the settlers and stopped them only 15 miles west of us. I've heard Pa tell often enough how they—" Ma made a sharp sound in her throat, and Mrs. Scott stopped. Ixnay on the Indian A. Whatever a massacre was, it was something that grown-ups would not talk about when little girls were listening. Well, no kidding. After Mrs. Scott had gone, Laura asked Ma what a massacre was. Ma said she could not explain that now. It was something that Laura would understand when she was older. Hopefully not too personally, but yikes. And again, at that time, as Laura repeatedly says, being impudent and contradicting your mother and asking adults direct questions and things, that's not something she was supposed to do. Yet, repeatedly, she's like, "So, about the Indians, what's a massacre? What does Mrs. Scott mean?" And that was a big deal. The fact that Laura Ingalls Wilder had these conversations in a book in the 1930s, she's actually kind of making quite the point. But, there was a war between the Indians and the settlers. Now, Mr. Edwards came to do the chores again that evening. And again, Jack treed him on the woodpile. Ma had to drag him off. She told Mr. Edwards she couldn't think what had got into him, that dog. Maybe it was the wind that upset him. The wind had a strange, wild howl in it, and it went through Laura's clothes as if the clothes weren't there. Her teeth and Mary's teeth chattered while they carried many armfuls of wood into the house. That night they thought of Pa and independence. If nothing had delayed him, he would be camping there now, near the houses and the people. Tomorrow he would be in the store buying things. Then, if he could get an early start, he could come part way home and camp on the prairie tomorrow night. And the next night he might come home. Now here is a picture of poor Mr. Edwards, who, unlike Mr. Edwards on the show, played by Victor Finch, he doesn't have a beard, and he's kind of this very young-looking, skinny guy, and he is treed on a woodpile by Jack the dog. Rawr! Rawr! There he is. Poor Mr. Edwards. Looks kind of sweet. In the morning, the wind was blowing fiercely, and it was cold. so cold that Ma kept the door shut. Laura and Mary stayed by the fire and listened to the wind screaming around the house and howling in the chimney. That afternoon they wondered if Pa was leaving Independence and coming toward them against the wind. Then, when it was dark, they wondered where he was camping. The wind was bitterly cold. It came even into the snug house and made their backs shiver while their faces roasted in the heat of the fire. Somewhere on that big, dark, lonesome prairie, Pa was camping in that wind. I'm really wondering why they left the big woods. It wasn't as bad in the big woods. Things were okay in the big woods. They were warm enough, and they had family nearby, and they weren't concerned about the land going to the Native Americans and them moving into their house and coming for cornbread. No prairie fires, and no mosquitoes and malaria. So they actually kind of had a better deal in the big woods. This perhaps was a mistake, moving to Kansas. It's sounding more and more like a big mistake, but there you go. Brrr. The next day was very long. They could not expect Pa in the morning, but they were waiting till they could expect him. In the afternoon, they began to watch the creek road. Jack was watching it too. He whined to go out, and he went all around the stable and the house, stopping to look toward the creek bottoms and show his teeth. Arr! The wind almost blew him off his feet. When he came in, he would not lie down. He walked about and worried. The hair rose on his neck and flattened and rose again. He tried to look out the window and then whined at the door. But when Ma opened it, he changed his mind and would not go out. The dog is freaking out that Pa is not there. Jack, although he's supposed to be Laura's dog, is clearly Pa's dog. He's not Laura's. He's Pa's dog because he is losing it because the dog's not there. Pa's not there. Dog is his dog. There, clearly. Jack's afraid of something, Mary said. Jack's not afraid of anything ever, Laura contradicted. Laura, Ma said, it isn't nice to contradict. Yeah, wait till Laura starts contradicting you about Indians in about 5 minutes, but there you go. In a minute, Jack decided to go out. He went to see that the cow and calf and Bunny were safe in the stable, and Laura wanted to tell Mary, I told you so. She didn't, but she wanted to. At chore time, Ma kept Jack in the house so he could not tree Mr. Edwards on the woodpile. Pa had not come yet. The wind blew. The wind blew Mr. Edwards right in through the door. He was breathless and stiff with cold. He warmed himself by the fire before he did the chores, and when he had done them, he sat down to warm himself again. He told Ma that Indians were camping in the shelter of the bluffs. He had seen the smoke from their fires when he crossed the bottoms. He asked Ma if she had a gun. Ma said she had Pa's pistol, and Mr. Edwards said, I reckon they'll stay close in camp a night like this. Yes, Ma said. Mr. Edwards said he could make himself right comfortable with hay in the stable, and he would spend the night there if Ma said so. Ma thanked him nicely, but said she would not put him to that trouble. They would be safe enough with Jack. I am expecting Mr. Ingalls any minute now, she told him. So Mr. Edwards put on his coat and cap and muffler and mittens and picked up his gun. He said he didn't guess that anything would bother her anyway. No, Ma said. Now, she didn't like Mr. Edwards, which is crazy because he's been nothing but nice to her and brought her stuff and saved their lives several times. And he was totally offering to camp there and hold off wolves, Indians, anything. And sleep in the barn, where it was freezing with no fire. She still said, nah, it's okay. I don't know, man. Yes, Pioneer Times would give you PTSD. Yes, I'm like having PTSD reading this. This is terrifying, these poor people. When she shut the door behind him, she pulled the latch string in through the dark, though darkness had not yet come. Laura and Mary could see the creek road plainly. They watched it till the dark hit it. Then Ma closed and barred the wooden window shutter. Pa had not come. They ate supper. They washed the dishes and swept the hearth, and still he had not come. Out in the dark where he was, the wind shrieked and wailed and howled. It rattled the door latch and shook the shutters. It screamed down the chimney, and fire roared and flared. All the time, Laura and Mary strained their ears to hear the sound of wagon wheels. They knew Ma was listening too, though she was rocking and singing Carrie to sleep. Carrie fell asleep, and Ma went on gently rocking. At last she undressed Carrie and put her to bed. Laura and Mary looked at each other. They didn't want to go to bed. Bedtime, girls, Ma said. Then Laura begged to be allowed to sit up till Pa came, and Mary backed her up, and till Ma said they might. For a long, long time they sat up. Mary yawned, then Laura yawned, then they both yawned, but they kept their eyes wide open. This is very unusual. Ma's actually letting the girls stay up, which she did not normally do. Laura's eyes saw things grow very large and then very small, and sometimes she saw two Marys, and sometimes she couldn't see at all, but she was gonna sit up until Pa came. Suddenly, a fearful crash scared her, and Ma picked her up. She had fallen off of the bench, smack onto the floor. Poor Laura, she's trying to stay awake, and she completely passed out and fell on the floor. She tried to tell Ma that she wasn't sleepy enough to have to go to bed, but an enormous yawn almost split her head in two. In the middle of the night, she sat straight up. Ma was sitting still in the rocking chair by the fire. The door latch rattled, the shutter shook, the wind was howling. Mary's eyes were open, and Jack walked up and down. Then Laura heard again a wild howl that rose and fell and rose again. "Lie down, Laura, and go to sleep," Ma said gently. "What's that howling?" Laura asked. "The wind is howling," said Ma. "Now mind me, Laura." Laura lay down, but her eyes would not shut. She knew that Pa was out in the dark, where that terrible howling was. The wild men were in the bluffs along the creek bottoms, and Pa would have to cross the creek bottoms in the dark. Jack growled, "Her." Then Ma began to sway gently in the comfortable rocking chair. Firelight ran up and down the barrel of Pa's pistol in her lap. Ma has a gun. And Ma sang softly and sweetly. "There is a happy land, far, far away, where saints in glory stand, bright, bright as day. Oh, to hear the angels sing, glory to the Lord our King." Laura didn't know that she'd gone to sleep. She thought the shining angels began to sing with Ma, and she lay listening to their heavenly singing, until suddenly her eyes opened, and she saw Pa standing by the fire. She jumped out of bed, shouting, "Oh, Pa! Pa!" Pa's boots were caked with frozen mud. His nose was red with cold. His hair wildly stood up on his head. He was so cold that coldness came through Laura's nightgown when she reached him. "Wait," he said. He wrapped Laura in Ma's big shawl, and then he hugged her. Everything was all right. The house was cozy with firelight. There was the warm brown smell of coffee. Ma was smiling, and Pa was there. The shawl was so large that Mary wrapped the other end of it around her. Pa pulled off his stiff boots and warmed his stiff, cold hands. Then he sat on the bench, and he took Mary on one knee and Laura on the other, and he hugged them against him, all snuggled in the shawl. Their bare toes toasted in the heat from the fire. "Ah," Pa sighed, "I thought I would never get here." Ma rummaged among the stores he had brought and spooned brown sugar into a tin cup. Pa had brought sugar from Independence. "Your coffee will be ready in a minute, Charles," she said. "It rained between here and Independence, going," Pa told them, "and coming back, the mud froze between the spokes till the wheels were nearly solid. I had to get out and knock it loose so the horses could pull the wagon, and it seemed like we'd no more than started when I had to get out and do it again. It was all I could do to keep Pet and Patty coming against that wind. They're so worn out they can hardly stagger. I never saw such a wind. It cuts like a knife." So, people who live in Kansas, do we have anyone from Kansas today on here? Is it that cold? I mean, we get some wind in California, but in Kansas, is it like that horrible? It sounds awful. Oh. Those are really good. Numbers. The wind had begun while he was in town. People there told him he'd better wait until it blew itself out, but he wanted to get home. "It beats me," he said, "why they call a south wind a norther, and how a wind from the south can be so tarnation cold. I never saw anything like it. Down here in this country, the north end of a south wind is the coldest wind I ever heard of." He drank his coffee and wiped his mustache with his handkerchief and said, "Ah, that hits the spot, Caroline. Now I'm beginning to thaw out." Yay, coffee. Then his eyes twinkled at Ma, and he told her to open the square package on the table. "Be careful," he said. "Don't drop it." Ma stopped unwrapping it and said, "Oh, Charles, you didn't." "Open it," Pa said. In that square package, there were 8 small squares of window glass. They would have glass windows in their house. Not one of the squares was broken. Pa had brought them safely all the way home. Ma shook her head and said he shouldn't have spent so much, but her whole face was smiling, and Pa laughed for joy. They were all so pleased. All winter long, they could look out of the windows as much as they liked, and the sunshine could come in. Right, because it's going to be freezing, snowing, and they're going to have to pull the shutters or they'll, die. But now they have glass. Pa said he thought that Ma and Mary and Laura would like glass windows better than any other present, and he was right. They did, but the windows were not all he brought them. There was a little paper sack full of pure white sugar. Ma opened it, and Mary and Laura looked at the sparkling whiteness of that beautiful sugar, and they each had a taste of it from a spoon. Then Ma tied it carefully up. They would have white sugar when company came. I hope they don't waste it on that terrible Mrs. Scott woman. Best of all, Pa was safely home again. Laura and Mary went back to sleep, very comfortable all over. Everything was all right when Pa was there. And now he had nails and cornmeal and fat pork and salt and everything. He would not have to go to town again for a long time. It's like, yay, salt. Oh, so good. Pa has brought more salt. Oh, these people and their salt, I swear. Now, like I said, things are going to get rough because the next chapter is the Tall Indian. In those 3 days, the norther had howled and screeched across the prairie till it blew itself out. Now the sun was warm and the wind was mild, but there was a feeling of autumn in the air. Indians came riding on the path that passed so close to the house. They went by as though it was not there. They were thin and brown and bare. They rode their little ponies without saddle or bridle. They sat up straight on the naked ponies and did not look to right or left, but their black eyes glittered. Laura and Mary backed against the house and looked up at them, and they saw red-brown skin bright across the blue sky and scalp locks wound with colored string and feathers quivering. The Indians' faces were like the red-brown wood that Pa had carved to make a bracket for Ma. "I thought that trail was an old one they didn't use anymore," Pa said. "I wouldn't have built the house so close if I'd known it's a high road." So Pa knew that there had been, in fact, essentially a Native American highway, a transportation route right smack through there, and built his house by curbside and just went, "Oh, I thought they weren't using it anymore." So Pa had not checked this out. Clearly, this road was like a main thoroughfare for the local Indians, and Pa didn't check around with the locals and find that out and plonked his house. And this is why the Indians keep showing up, because they're like, "Hey dude, you build a house in the middle of the street. Who are you with the house in the middle of the street with the wife and kids? Because that seems odd. We're going to come over and have some cornbread and try to figure out who the weirdo is who built his house in the middle of the street." Because, yikes. Oh well. Jack hated Indians, and Ma said she didn't blame him. She said, "I declare, Indians are getting so thick around here that I can't look up without seeing one." As she spoke, she looked up, and there stood an Indian. So, well, she was right about that then. Of course, as she said, and as Laura questioned her, they had moved to, quote, Indian country. As Laura said, if you don't like them, why did you move to Indian country? So indeed, they moved like a few yards from an Indian camp, built their house essentially on an Indian road, and she said, "There's a lot of Indians around here." She noticed that. The Indians stood in the doorway, looking at them, and they had not heard a sound. "Oh, goodness!" Pa gasped. Silently, Jack jumped at the Indian. Pa caught him by the collar just in time. The Indian hadn't moved. He stood as still as if Jack hadn't been there at all. "How?" he said to Pa. Pa held on to Jack and replied, How? He dragged Jack to the bedpost and tied him there. While he was doing it, the Indian came in and squatted down by the fire. I always wondered, what is the actual word that Native Americans were saying when we all decided that was how? Because it probably wasn't how. What was the actual word? I'm sure there was some historian person on here who completely knows this, but I don't know it's how. Because remember that we're talking, how many different tribes were in America at the time? Hundreds, all with their own language and their own customs, their own religion, their own political system, their own way of life, completely different. So they couldn't have all just said how. So what the heck did people actually say that we now just go in the movies? They must have said how. I don't know. But Pa goes, whatever it was, Pa said it back. So Pa squatted down by the Indian, and they sat there, friendly but not saying a word, while Ma finished cooking dinner. Laura and Mary were close together and quiet on their bed in the corner. They couldn't take their eyes from that Indian. He was so still that the beautiful eagle feathers in his scalp lock didn't stir. Only his bare chest and the leanness under his ribs moved a little to his breathing. He wore fringed leather leggings, and his moccasins were covered with beads. He was very well dressed. Ma gave Pa and the Indian their dinners on 2 tin plates, and they ate silently. Then Pa gave the Indian some tobacco for his pipe. They filled their pipes, and they lighted the tobacco with coals in the fire, and they silently smoked until the pipes were empty. So Pa literally smoked a peace pipe with the Indian by the fire. Now, they don't mention what she served for dinner that night, but this is interesting. Whatever she was making, prairie hens, whatever, roast rabbit, was similar enough to what the Indians were eating. Because remember when they went and they found the Indian campfire and there was rabbit bones. So, despite these supposedly huge differences, when she handed him the plate, he didn't look to see what it was or wonder if this was similar to food that he ate or what on earth she could have been serving. He ate it because there was very little difference, really, between what the Ingalls were eating and what the Indians were eating, despite them thinking that it was horribly. Was somebody saying the how? Yes. Someone knows this. Yes, Lakota. Okay, people are totally posting this. They've looked it up. We have experts in the field posting and explaining what the word how actually is. Good. Somebody knows this. I have to look this up. All this time, nobody had said anything. But now the Indian said something to Pa. Pa shook his head and said, "No speak." A while longer, they all sat silent. Then the Indian rose up and went away without a sound. "My goodness gracious," Ma said. Laura and Mary ran to the window. They saw the Indian straight back, riding away on a pony. He held a gun across his knees, its end stuck out on either side of him. Pa said that Indian was no common trash. He guessed by the scalp lock he was an Osage. Unless I miss my guess, Pa said, that was French he spoke. I wish I had picked up some of that lingo. Pa wishes he spoke French. The Indian spoke French. This is the book that the pilot of Little House on the Prairie, the TV movie, the pilot with Mr. Edwards and the Christmas Presents, that was based on this. And then the show's all based on the next book, On the Banks of Plum Creek. And in the pilot, we have French-speaking Indians. The Indians show up and they speak French. And I think that this is part of why the show was such a jumbo. Oh yeah, Pa doesn't know. So there you go. So he knew at least 2 languages. This show was so popular, the pilot, when it ran in France. And part of that was the Indians were speaking French. It was the thing. It was like, oh, look, there's like French-speaking characters in this already. But yes, the Indians, because the French trappers and whatnot. So they did. Indians spoke French, parlaient français. And si Charles parlait français, peut-être il parle avec les Indiens. Oh, wait, I'm speaking French. Ha! But yet, Pa did not speak French. Boo, too bad. Mrs. Oleson spoke French. If Mrs. Oleson was there, she could have spoken to the Indians. Let Indians keep themselves to themselves, said Ma, and we will do the same. I don't like Indians around underfoot. Pa told her not to worry. That Indian was perfectly friendly, he said, and their camps down among the bluffs are peaceable enough. If we treat them well and watch Jack, we won't have any trouble. Oh, there's a concept. If we treat them well, and these are perfectly friendly people, that's not a thing. The very next morning, when Pa opened the door to go to the stable, Laura saw Jack standing in the Indian trail. He stood stiff, his back bristled, and all his teeth showed. Before him in the path, the tall Indian sat on his pony. Indian and pony were still as still. Jack was telling them plainly he would spring if they moved. Only the eagle feathers that stood up from the Indian's scalp lock were waving and spinning in the wind. When the Indian saw Pa, he lifted his gun and pointed it straight at Jack. This is an Indian here who is pointing a gun at the dog. Well, because he's like, is this dog going to attack me? What are we doing here? Points gun at the dog. Yikes. Laura ran to the door, but Pa was quicker. Pa stepped between Jack and that gun, and he reached down and grabbed Jack by the collar. He dragged Jack out of the Indian's way, and the Indian rode on along the trail. Pa stood with his feet wide apart, his hands in his pockets, and watched the Indian riding farther and farther away across the prairie. That was a darn close call, Pa said. Well, it's his path and an Indian trail long before we came. Pa finally acknowledging that he has built his house in the middle of the freeway, and his dog was actually blocking the road. The Indian was like, dog out of the street. So they kind of got a problem here. He drove an iron ring into a log of the house wall, and he chained Jack to it. Poor Jack. After that, Jack was always chained. He was chained to the house in the daytime, and at night he was chained to the stable door, because horse thieves were in the country now. They had stolen Mr. Edward's horses. Jack grew crosser and crosser because he was chained, but it could not be helped. He would not admit that the trail was the Indian's trail. He thought it belonged to Pa, and Laura knew that something terrible would happen if Jack hurt an Indian. So, we've just saying here, the dog thinks it belongs to Pa. Laura Ingalls Wilder is stating quite clearly that the land does not belong to Pa. It belongs to the Native Americans. They're in the wrong spot. They have clearly settled in the wrong place. So they got horse thieves. Were there horse thieves in the big woods? There were no horse thieves in the big woods. They were in the big woods. They did horse thieves and malaria and nice. No, they had to move to Kansas. Not going well. Winter was coming now. So a reflection of the... Yes, exactly. Something about the Indians, a reflection of the 1930s as well, because these came out in the 30s. As I said, whoa, people's attitudes toward Native Americans were not exactly progressive in the 1930s. In fact, for Laura Ingalls Wilder to write this stuff with Laura arguing and saying, no, it's the Indians' land, etc., was shocking at the time. This is like a pro-Native American rights political pamphlet, actually. Winter was coming now. The grasses were a dull color under a dull sky. The winds wailed as if they were looking for something they could not find. Wild animals were wearing their thick winter fur, and Pa set his traps in the creek bottoms. Every day he visited them, and every day he went hunting. Now that the nights were freezing cold, he shot deer for meat. He shot wolves and foxes for their fur, and his traps caught beaver and muskrat and mink. Mink! Good mink out. He stretched the skins on the outside of the house and carefully tacked them there to dry. In the evenings, he worked the dried skins between his hands to make them soft, and he added them to the bundle in the corner. Every day, the bundle of furs grew bigger, trapping and fur trading, like a French person would do that. Laura loved to stroke the thick fur of the red foxes. She liked the brown, soft fur of beaver, too, and the shaggy wolf's fur. But best of all, she loved the silky mink. Yeah, no kidding. Those were all furs that Pa saved to trade next spring in Independence. Laura and Mary had rabbit skin caps, and Pa's cap was muskrat. But I love that. She's like, and she really liked the mink. Get a full-length mink coat. Indeed. One day, when Pa was hunting, 2 Indians came. It's kind of every day now. They're kind of coming over every day. It was like once in a while. It's like once every few. They're just kind of coming over every day. They came into the house because Jack was chained. Those Indians were dirty and scowling and mean. They acted as if the house belonged to them. One of them looked through Ma's cupboard and took all the cornbread. The cornbread. Wait, I need a piece of cornbread for this. And they took all the cornbread. Well, I'd be very sad. I would have to have enough cornbread for the Indians and me. The other, took Pa's tobacco pouch. I do love cornbread. I don't love tobacco. They looked at the pegs where Pa's gun belonged. Then one of them picked up the bundle of furs. Ma held baby Carrie in her arms, and Mary and Laura stood close to her. They looked at that Indian taking Pa's furs. They couldn't do anything to stop him. This is Indians stealing fur. Ah. Oh dear. He carried them as far as the door. Then the other Indian said something to him. They made harsh sounds at each other in their throats, and he dropped the furs. They went away. Interesting. They're going to take fur, and the other Indian went, no, don't. We got the tobacco and the cornbread. Don't take the fur. We don't need the fur. He dropped the furs, which was good. Ma sat down. She hugged Mary and Laura close to her, and Laura felt Ma's heart beating. Well, Ma said, smiling, I'm thankful they didn't take the plow and the seeds. Laura was surprised. She asked, what plow? The plow and all of our seeds for next year are in that bundle of furs. It's a very small plow. I guess it's the plow blade he had stashed. I don't know. When Pa came home, they told him about those Indians, and he looked sober. But he said, that was all was well that ended well. All's well that ends well again. That evening, when Mary and Laura were in bed, Pa played his fiddle. Ma was rocking in the rocking chair, holding baby Carrie against her breast, and she began to sing softly with the fiddle. And she sings a song about Indians. Wild roved an Indian maid, bright Alfarata. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Alfarata. Where flow the waters of the blue Waniata. Waniata. Strong and true my arrows are in my painted quiver. Swift goes my light canoe adown the rapid river. Bold is my warrior good, the love of Alfarata. Proud waves his sunny plumes along the Waniata. Soft and low he speaks to me, then his war cry sounding, rings his voice in thunder loud, from height to height resounding. So sang the Indian maid, bright Alfarata, where sweep the waters of the blue Juniata is the next name. Fleeting years have worn away the voice of Alfarata, still flow the waters of the blue Huniata. Ma's voice and the fiddle's music softly died away, and Laura asked, where did the voice of Alfarata go, Ma? Goodness, Ma said, aren't you asleep yet? I'm going to sleep, Laura said, but please tell me where the voice of Alfarata went. It's rather impertinent, isn't she? Oh, I suppose she went west, Ma answered. That's what the Indians do. Why do they do that, Ma? Laura asked. Why do they go west? They have to, Ma said. Why do they have to? Okay. How is Laura getting away with this? As we know, Laura was told not to argue and contradict her. She's going, why? So why are the Indians moving, Ma? She's arguing here and demanding to know why the Indians moved. And this is so like, Laura Ingalls Wilder, the writer's making a point. In real life, would she at 8, 9 years old have been this in her mother's face with the why? No, she wouldn't. Her mother would have sent her to bed. But she's doing this on purpose. Why do they have to do that, Ma? Why do they go west? They have to. Why do they have to? The government makes them, Laura, said Pa. Now go to sleep. He played the fiddle softly for a while. Then Laura asked, please, Pa, can I ask just one more question? May I, said Ma. Laura began again. Pa, please, may I? What is it, Pa asked. It was not polite for little girls to interrupt, but of course, Pa could do it. Will the government make these Indians go west? Yes, Pa said. Now, hold on to your horses. When white settlers come into a country, the Indians have to move on. The government is going to move these Indians farther west any time now. That's why we're here, Laura. White people are going to settle all of this country, and we get the best land because we get here first and take our pick. Now do you understand? Yes, Pa, Laura said. But Pa, I thought this was Indian territory. Won't it make the Indians mad to have to... No more questions, Laura, Pa said firmly. Go to sleep. Well, now, that was rather pointed. This book came out in the 1930s. In the 1930s, when generally people were still of the disposition, white people were that the Native Americans. Oh well, they had to move. That no, the Native American civil rights movement had not happened in the 1930s, and yet here we have Laura Ingalls Wilder having an 8-year-old girl start a political debate with her parents over the rights of the Native Americans to the land, and question repeatedly why the government is making them move off their own land, and Pa having to explain because yes, it's their land and we're taking it from them, and we white people are going to take this land and make them move. Yikes. That's just flat out. No sugarcoating it. There's no story of like, oh, no, we had a treaty and it's fine with the Indians or we paid for the land. Nope. Coming right out and admitting that they're taking it. And Pa is not totally happy about this. Ma does not like the Native Americans. Is like, I wish they'd go soon. Mrs. Scott. Oh, Mrs. Scott actually said the thing about only good Indian's a dead Indian. Mrs. Scott went there. Wow. Laura Ingalls Wilder does not agree. Now, I bring this up because, A, it's shocking that in a book that was released in the 30s and takes place in the 1870s, that a little girl is being an advocate for the rights of Native Americans to their land is kind of a big deal. That's like not a normal thing to happen. The other thing that's weird is that now, in 2020, there are people saying that Laura Ingalls Wilder was not pro the rights of Native Americans to their land, that Laura Ingalls Wilder was anti-Native American. That would be the opposite entirely of what is happening in this book. So just clearing that up, that whatever else you may think about Laura Ingalls Wilder, she was basically writing a pro-Native American liberation screed in the 1930s when people were not doing that. So there you go. Scary, huh? And watermelon also does not give you malaria. Things we learn. It is. And people say this is a children's book. They go, that's quite a lot for a children's book. Yes, it's a alleged children's book. And they talk about massacres, about the government, treaties, moving Indians land. And 5 minutes later they're talking about Mom making cornbread and Mr. Edwards bringing them candy. And it's kind of like, I'm getting whiplash from this book. It's like, oh, it's a children's book, Mr. And then the government broke their treaty with, wait, what? This is yes. So Little House on the Prairie can get intense. It gets quite heavy. And this is only the 3rd book in the series. We're not even done with that. And things get crazy. People die. Mary's going to go blind soon. It's like heavy stuff that Laura took on. And so there you go. And we got some of it into the show. And then some of the stuff was just, well, because it was TV. We were making a TV show. We got crazy. But we got a little in there. It's pretty cool. So yes, fascinating stuff. Makes you want to go read history, which is always a good thing. So I'm still in the living room, and I'll still be in my living room tomorrow. I wonder, am I going to get more bonnets? Yeah, right? I don't know. I've asked for more bonnets. It's hard. They got to make them. So I'll see if I get more bonnets soon. And remember, May 9th is this crazy thing where I'm going to be live again in the living room. I'll be in a different part of the living room. It'll be very exciting. Hello. Huh? Oh, I didn't do that's right. See? Bob's here. You should say hi. Say hi quickly.
Hi, quickly.
No, come around.
No.
Come around.
I can't be on camera.
My husband, Bob, who is also home, because it is Sunday. Come say hi. Wait, are you going to change your clothes? Oh, yes. Well, they look much better now. Yes. Yes, we have, Bob will be entering any minute now, Bob.
You know how I like to make an entrance.
He's making an entrance. Look, it's Bob. Hello. Yay!
Okay.
Oh, there's Bill Graff. Bill Graff's there.
Bye. Hi, Bill.
Okay. And as Bob rightly brought up, you see, we've been talking about all the wonderful things that fans make me. Remember I said yesterday, I don't have anything from the show. I just have cool stuff people made me. Can you see this? Yes, look! Look, it's it's the Mercantile. Oh my God, it's the Mercantile. What is this? This is a gorgeous painting. It's a watercolor painting, and it is by Jennifer Schoolcraft. She's on Facebook. It was the 40th anniversary because we went to Walnut Grove and all that. Look at this, and she made this, and I have this, and I have several. I got a drawing one. I got an oil one. I got a watercolor one. I got a pencil one. All of the Mercantile by different artists. So cool. And then of course Eric of Montreal, Eric Caron, he's made a model. We'll show that off. But check it out. Painting of the Mercantile. So I have this. I have like all of these gorgeous things of my old home on the prairie. And so that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So yes, I'm doing Cameo. I have a little store. I have May 9th. So May 9th, like I said, I'll be in a different part of the living room. I was going to be in New York, but I'll pretend I'm in New York in my living room. And it's only a half an hour, but it's going to be really cool. And it will be stuff from my stand-up show. And it will be wicked fun and cool. And you should all get on with that. So that'll be good. And then who knows what'll happen next. I'm setting stuff up. I believe Charlotte Stewart, Miss Beadle, it was going to be on soon because we're starting the next book. I believe I may have the technology to have two of us on at the same time. Like split screen, so you can have me and Miss Beadle at the same time. Woo! And then, of course, Dean Butler's going to be back, because he said he needs to read Part of the Long Winter, because Alonzo comes back. So, yes, many exciting things. We're doing things. It's so exciting. Lots and lots of cool stuff will be happening here. And thank you for hanging out with me on a Sunday, and we'll do this again tomorrow. And as always, take care. Do try to get some rest. It's very stressful. Get some rest. And, oh yes, that's right. It's National Hang... Do you know they have a national day for, like, everything in the world? Like, completely silly things that don't even, like, make it... Somebody makes this up. Actually, there was an article. There's, like, some woman who spends her whole time, she has an office, coming up with National Crumpet Day and stuff. But today, it's National Amaretto Day. Do you like amaretto? I like amaretto. But, oh, National Garlic Day. Okay, we can all get into National Garlic Day. I like that. But it's National Hanging Out Day. And we're celebrating this properly. We are all hanging out together at home. So this is working. Next, a hanging out day. Also, do we have people in North Dakota? North Dakota there? Because it's National North Dakota Day. Who knew? There you go. Happy North Dakota Day. Happy Garlic Day. Happy Hanging Out Day. And wash your hands. Wash your hands. Wear little masks. Take care. Get some rest. And I'll see you tomorrow.